Welcome to this explainer on the New England colonies. Today, we're going to unpack a truly fascinating contradiction in U.S. history. We are exploring the intense clash between the English settlers' extremely high religious ideals and the rather harsh, sometimes even brutal, reality of the actual society they built. It's a story of faith, hard work, deep intolerance, and really devastating conflict.
Here is what we're looking at today: seeking a new English Israel, town life and economy, the limits of freedom, conflict with native peoples, and finally, a recap and final thought.
Section 1. Seeking a New English Israel. So let's jump right in. Back in 1620, a small group we know as the Pilgrims, and they were separatists, meaning they demanded a total, complete break from the Church of England, signed the Mayflower Compact and founded Plymouth Colony. Then, just a decade later, in 1630, a much larger wave of Puritans arrived to establish the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Now, unlike the Pilgrims, these Puritans actually just wanted to reform or purify the church. But, they had to cross an entire ocean to do it without being persecuted. And the sheer scale of their ambition? Honestly, it was incredible. John Winthrop, the very first governor of Massachusetts Bay, famously envisioned their settlement as a city upon a hill. They literally saw themselves as building a new English Israel. The goal was to create this perfect, shining model of Reformed Protestantism that they fully believed the entire Christian world would look at and want to copy. Section 2. Town life and economy. So, speaking of that economy and town life, when you compare New England to the Chesapeake colonies down south, like Virginia, the differences are night and day. Down in the Chesapeake, you mostly had young, single men looking to get rich quick. They relied heavily on indentured servants and enslaved Africans to grow massive cash crops like tobacco. But up in New England, they arrived in full family units, and their economy wasn't built on sprawling plantations at all. Instead, it was all about maritime trade and shipbuilding, which was powered by a strictly disciplined, homegrown family workforce. Okay, time for a quick pause check. Think about this for a second. Why exactly did New England develop a maritime economy instead of an agricultural cash crop system? Why turn to the freezing ocean to make a profit? Well, the immediate answer is geography. They literally couldn't farm on a massive scale even if they wanted to. The cold climate up there meant really short growing seasons, and if you've ever been to New England, you know the soil is incredibly rocky. It's kind of like trying to plant a massive farm in a gravel driveway. So instead, they channeled that strong Puritan work ethic into diverse industries, especially the sea. That disciplined family workforce, including the kids, did the heavy lifting, leading to a booming maritime economy. Section 3. The limits of freedom. Now, regarding those limits, here is one of the greatest paradoxes of early American history. Their stated ideal was to flee persecution from the Church of England so they could practice their religion freely, right? But the reality, well, once they were the ones in charge, they proved to be strict persecutors themselves. They demanded absolute conformity to their specific Puritan beliefs, and they outright banished dissenters. There was really no freedom of religion here unless you agreed exactly with them. Which brings us to our second pause check. Why were literate women like Anne Hutchinson viewed as such a major threat by Puritan authorities? The answer really comes down to the threat she posed to their absolute power. See, Hutchinson claimed she had direct religious revelation from God, and by claiming she could communicate directly with the divine, she completely bypassed the male ministers. That directly challenged the rigid social hierarchy and the absolute authority of those leaders. Because of this, Puritan authorities didn't just disagree with her, they excommunicated her and exiled her right into the wilderness. And Hutchinson definitely wasn't the only target. You had Roger Williams, who was banished for advocating for actual religious freedom. He eventually went on to found Rhode Island. And then you have the absolute peak of this rigid fear of the unknown erupting in 1692 with the Salem witch trials. The community was so traumatized by frontier wars and political chaos that they just blamed supernatural forces for the changing times. That panic tragically led to 19 people being executed. Section 4. Conflict with native peoples. So how did this conflict actually play out? Well, this intense desire for control, combined with a relentless push for territorial expansion, completely fractured their relationships with Native Americans. It escalated in 3 main steps. First, you had initial alliances, like the 1621 Wampanoag Treaty and the creation of praying towns. But then things got much darker, with Step 2, the Pequot Massacre in 1637, which was a horrific attack on the Mystic River. Finally, step 3, this massive regional conflict known as King Philip's War from 1675 to 1676. Let's zero in on King Philip's War for a second. The Wampanoag leader Metacom, who the English called King Philip, fought desperately to stop English encroachment on their land. It was a completely devastating conflict. Ultimately, it resulted in a massive native defeat, and it really sparked a dark new era of intense racial hatred toward native peoples in that region. Section 5. Recap and final thought. All right, we've covered a whole lot of ground today in this explainer, so let's pull all these historical threads together. 1. Pilgrims and Puritans sought to build a model religious society. 2. They relied heavily on homegrown family labor to create a thriving maritime economy. 3. They ironically denied the exact religious freedom they originally sought to dissenters like Hutchinson and Williams. And 4. Their aggressive territorial expansion led to devastating wars with Native Americans. Now, I want to leave you with the transfer question to really chew on. How does the Puritan contradiction of seeking freedom while denying it to others help us understand the complexities of early American democratic ideals? We often think of America as being founded purely on the ideal of liberty, but looking at this specific contradiction, it really helps us grasp the deeply complicated, sometimes hypocritical, and definitely messy roots of American democracy. It's a fascinating question to ponder. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.